All right, well, we'll go ahead and get started then. Hello and welcome to today's roundtable. I'm Kayleen, Manager of Customer Communications and Marketing at BullseyeEngagement. And joining me also from the Bullseye team are our Chairman and CEO, Adil, as well as Raquel, VP of Client Services and Success. And this morning, we are very excited to have Dr. Jennifer Bonilla with us as our guest. She holds a Ph.D. from Iowa State University of Science and Technology with research in the area of clinician burnout, employee engagement, and turnover intention. She is also a SHRM Senior Certified Professional, as well as a Board Certified Fellow of the American College of Healthcare Executives. She has 25 years leadership experience in a diverse set of industry sectors, including healthcare and education. Some of her notable roles include CEO for ISS Facility Services North America and Division Healthcare President of Sodexo, just to name a few. So thank you for joining us today, Dr. Bonilla. Hope you are doing well this morning, and why don't we just get started with the discussion.
Thank you, Kayleen. I'm glad to be here.
So let's start by asking, what exactly are the components of employee engagement? And maybe what are some best practices of organizational facilitators in delivering an exceptional employee experience?
Sure, I think that's a really important question right now as we think about the world that most employees are operating in away from the workplace, and really thinking about how their employee experience has changed during this very strange time for everybody. So employee engagement is made up of a number of different factors, but I think one of the most critical factors is the culture of an organization. So culture really stems from the brand that the company is trying to achieve, and it's really communicated to employees in terms of the mission, the vision, the values an organization lays out for the company. And I think today, because there are a lot of millennials in the workforce, and in fact, by 2030, we're going to see the majority of employees in the workforce will be millennials. Many of them are very purpose-driven. So they look for companies that are very focused on having the right kind of culture. Companies that have a very important purpose, are very mission-driven, and so on. So I think not only do employees today, regardless of what generation they come from, they tend to gravitate toward companies that have a mission that they feel aligned with, a mission that they feel is important to their own personal beliefs. And so that's more important than ever in terms of having that kind of mission that your employees feel strongly about. And that really drives employee engagement. There are some other factors as well that I think are critical, and that is the kind of leadership in the company. People want to work for leaders that inspire them. They want to work for leaders that they respect and identify with. And so having leaders that really live the value of the company and demonstrate the culture and really, live the values that the company espouses is incredibly important. Another really important element, and this probably could never be more important than during the time of COVID when people are working remotely, is communication. Employee communication is vitally important. It happens in many different ways, and now much of it is done through remote technology. And so how a company develops its communication strategy and the kind of communication practices that it has are really important to employees. And employees think about that as they shop for an employer, and they think about it often as they live within a company as to whether that communication strategy really meets their needs. And then some of the important programs that a company has, I think, makes a big difference in terms of the level of engagement employees will have, and that's around things like rewards and recognition and people development. Now, it's interesting, a lot of people erroneously believe that employees choose companies primarily based on compensation, but many studies have been done over the last few decades and have demonstrated that actually compensation is about number 5 on the wish list of employees in terms of things they look for. And so the other factors that I've already mentioned in terms of culture and leadership and communication, and the mission and vision and values, all those factors are far more important, along with who those employees will work with, who are their peers, who are the teams they work with, and do they have meaningful work. So those are some of the things that I think are really important. The other piece I'd mention in terms of sort of providing a more of an introduction to employee engagement is there's really 3 different statuses of engagement that employees have when they work for a company. You can have an engaged employee, an employee that is not engaged, and you can have a disengaged employee. And interestingly enough, the majority of employees fall into that sort of middle category as being not engaged. So this is really important because companies that have high levels of engaged employees have better business outcomes. They perform better. And so you want to really strive toward having a high number of employees in that top echelon where they're actually engaged. Today, across the US, about 40% of employees are classified as engaged, around 47% in the middle category of not being engaged, they're sort of neutral, and about 13% of employees are actually disengaged, and so they actually are more of your dissident workforce. They're actually working against you. They might be there for whatever reason. Maybe it's because of the compensation and benefits. Maybe it's because they know certain people in the company or it's close to home to drive to, but they're not really behind the mission of the company. And so it's really important as a corporation to figure out what's the right recipe to get the highest percentage of employees into that engaged category so they're really delivering. Some of the practices that I think help do that, again, are how you really operate on a given day. And it's about how you're communicating to your workforce. Are you providing meaningful assignments? Ongoing, do they understand? Are you sharing how employees' work connects with the broader mission of the company? So they feel that ongoing connection and they really want to be a part of things. In terms of your workplace practices, your recruitment strategies, are you bringing in people to the company that that sort of your current workforce thinks really adds value and is aligned with your mission, vision, and values? What kind of advancement strategy do you have? Do you have a promote from within approach where people really feel like they have a lot of opportunity? Or do you mostly hire external people where they feel like they have sort of a dead-ended career if they come to the company? And then finally, there's a lot more focus now around things like inclusiveness. If you come to the company, can you really be your authentic self? You know, do you have to change to kind of fit in with the company, or do they allow you to demonstrate who you really are and you're very comfortable doing that? So the environments where you have, you know, these kinds of attributes are really important. And often you'll see lists each year of what are considered the best employers in the country. And they do these things really well. And employees that work at these companies won't cross the street to go work somewhere else for, you know, $5,000 a year more, or a better title or that kind of thing, because they feel so part of the organization and they truly are engaged. They're behind what the company is doing and want to stay there for a really long time.
You touched on this a little bit, but why is it important for organizations to continue to sustain positive employee experience despite the current economic conditions?
Sure, that's a really great question, Kayleen. First of all, you know, companies are obviously under intense financial pressure, depending upon what industry they're in. Some companies are really struggling in terms of preserving their top line revenue growth, but also being able to deliver the bottom line, being able to manage their cost structure when they're seeing such pressure in terms of revenue growth based on the business model that they have. So, you know, in normal times, it's a lot easier to stay on track with the programs that you have, and it's easy for companies when they get into difficulty to start wanting to cost cut and look at things that they think are dispensable, that are not that valuable to the company, and that they can sort of do away with. But I think it's really important right now that companies think about how important their employee engagement strategy and how important their employees are to their broader value proposition. because I think employees right now, while they can't really jump ship in most cases, they're afraid to, or there isn't an opportunity where they can go work somewhere else. I think they're watching closely right now in terms of how their companies are responding to COVID. So how have they handled things like layoffs or furloughs? And not that, you know, they aren't doing those things, but there's certain ways you can do them to demonstrate greater sensitivity to your employees, to demonstrate greater empathy to your employees, that show you're the kind of company that they want to work for, even if they have to make some tough decisions. So employees want to know that employers are doing the right thing, even under the most difficult circumstances. And that means that they're being sensitive, that they are continuing to make good choices around investments. But probably most important is they just want honest, transparent communication. And so, you know, I think employees can appreciate being told some bad news if their employers are just being direct with them, and appreciate and value that. But companies that demonstrate these kind of behaviors right now, I think will do well for the long term, because if you're true to your values, you don't stray because you're looking at your quarterly results and think, you know what, I'm going to pull back on these employee investments. And those companies are enduring. They're the companies that are on those best-in-class employer lists year after year, because they don't make short-term decisions. They want to continue to invest in their people, no matter what's happening in that marketplace, and they really deliver sustainable value to their shareholders because of that approach.
You know, as we talk about positive employee experience and communication and frequent communication, how do you see the features of check-in to have touch points? And especially now that majority of the workforce is, I mean, we're all working from home today. I mean, we're all connecting with you from our homes, and starting February, March, all of our team members have been at home. So if you can just shed a little bit light on the check-ins that as we have them in our portal.
Sure, that's a great question, Adil. I think companies that have the capability of having easy software tools at their disposal, like Bullseye, where they can connect with employees on a frequent basis is important. And again, employees like to connect in different ways. Sometimes I know so many people that are having 11 and 12 conference calls a day right now, and they live on Zoom. So I think having some flexible means of communicating, not necessarily always calling people or having one more Zoom meeting, but having the ability to do some electronic communication can be really helpful, because then they can sort of manage their heavy workload. But they can also stay in touch with their organization, whether that's their boss or a peer, through that check-in process. So I think that's a great example of a tool that can be really beneficial to make an employee feel a part of the organization, and also voice any concerns or questions they might have during that time through that mechanism.
All right, so obviously communication is important, but what role does employee development play in this big picture, so in employee engagement and the overall employee experience?
Mm-hmm. You know, Kayleen, I think people used to come to the workforce years ago where maybe they'd finished their college degree and they came in to a job and they kind of thought that their training was done. But now the world is changing so quickly, and the technologies are changing so quickly, that you have to be a lifelong learner. You have to be really focused yourself on continuous improvement if you want to be able to advance in your career. And so now, you know, employees have a lot of expectation around that, is how will my company continue to invest in me and develop me, not only in my current role, but to get me ready for my next role, so I can advance. Again, millennials have an expectation of typically wanting to advance quite quickly and maybe not take all the steps that we might have taken in our careers, where we had to be 5 or 10 years in a role before we could get promoted. That's changed pretty significantly. So it's interesting, when you come to a company, in many cases you might have a contract or an offer letter that says what the company is going to do for you. But there's a lot of things that are not written in terms of what a company expects from their employee and what an employee expects from their company. And that's really, you know, it's not explicit, it's implied, it's an implicit contract. Some of the work that I did in my research, I really looked at that implicit contract around what do employees expect and psychological contract theory. So if you believe in your mind that somebody owes you something, like your employer, you're going to come from that vantage all the time. And if you feel like that employer has not come through for you with that, that's going to create a sense of either cause you to not be engaged or even be disengaged. So employee development is incredibly important to be able to demonstrate to employees that you care about them, you're investing in them, and that psychological contract fulfillment is really important. There's been a lot of research done that shows if you fulfill the psychological contract for your employee, they are far more likely to be engaged. There's a direct correlation with engagement, and there's an inverse relationship to turnover and burnout. So you develop them, you fulfill them, they're much less likely to leave your company or to be burned out because they feel like you're not investing in them. So that's kind of the premise that people have when they come to the workforce. But today, again, in the COVID world, employees feel like they're really going the extra mile. Many employees are working from home, and interestingly enough, even though they're not directly supervised at home, I hear constantly, and I've read many articles about employees that feel like they're actually working far more hours than they ever were before. There's sort of a blurring where it's hard to step away from your home office. So in essence, you may be working 5 or 10 more hours per week than you ever did when you were in the office. So that's kind of replaced your commute time. So you're giving a lot more to your company, and in many cases, employees want to. They want to see their companies not only survive, but thrive during the pandemic. So in return, they want to make sure that companies are really stepping up and providing that sense of development to them. And the good news is, I think companies have a lot of opportunity here. Before we had the pandemic, people traveled really extensively. There was a lot of money spent on T&E, conferences, and those kinds of things. But again, typically that's not the best bang for your buck in terms of developing your people. If you can really make sure that you have a commitment from the top of the organization around employee development, and then make sure that you provide that level of support to your managers in terms of how they provide custom development plans for their people, you can really have very effective development for your employees that is not significant in terms of cost. So now you can spend more money on some custom development plans. You can put some mentoring plans in place that are predominantly done in-house. You can invest in technology and software that can help you with a lot of those programs that can be really impactful and actually be spending less money, and employees will really feel like they're really getting some great result from that. But typically doing things like stretch assignments with employees where they can take on some other projects, or encouraging lateral moves for employees where they can get some cross-functional experience, or a staff role, for example, again, can be much more impactful in terms of their advancement and development than sending them to an expensive conference. So that's the good news in terms of how we shift our thinking around developing people, and then how it can have a positive link with engagement.
Jennifer, just another follow-up question, and your answers are so well thought out, and I'm sure that our audience will really get a lot of insights. So thank you for that answer. I had a brainstorming session with a Fortune 100 company on the West Coast, without naming the name, and when it comes to employee development, after that session, we ended up adding a feature in our portal where employees can communicate directly without any filters with their mentors and coaches. And you just mentioned mentoring, and that's what triggered this, this thought. So what do you propose, or what is your advice to companies to have either formal or informal mentors for all their team members, where they have another avenue other than their direct manager to go out and express their either concerns or fears or things that they cannot or they don't feel easy discussing with their direct managers.
Sure.
And what
Sure.
role that plays in forward-looking companies to have that kind of environment and culture.
Yeah, I think that's really important, Adil. You know, in some cases, you can have an amazingly supportive boss and someone that you feel very comfortable talking to, but that doesn't exist for everybody. And you can gain so much through your mentoring relationships. I've worked for some very large companies and had an opportunity to not only build formal mentoring programs, but actually run them. I've been a mentor, I've been a mentee over the years. And so being in those different roles, you gain some insight in terms of what works and what doesn't work. And, you know, I think a lot of times the formal mentor programs are set up with the best of intentions. So companies want to be doing the right things, and they think, you know, if they provide these formal relationships, that they'll get some great results. A lot of times though, they might set up kind of an unnatural relationship with how they pair people, and it may not work. There may not be the chemistry necessary for it to be really effective. So in many cases, I think the informal mentoring relationships, if you can access them as early or mid-career manager, can be really powerful. The one other piece is it's really hard to sustain the formal programs. People all sort of jump into those, whether you're a mentor or a mentee, with a lot of enthusiasm originally, but in many cases after the first meeting or two, they're hard to sustain. People don't keep up with it, the business gets in the way, and so on. So I think if you can have some of the informal mentoring relationships that may not require specific tasks or specific time frames as to when you reach out to people, that can be more effective. And certainly having a mechanism where you can reach out either electronically or through telephone or video to informal mentors when you're coming across issues that you're struggling with in terms of how to deal with the situation. And many of those are related to how you're handling a potential conflict in the business, whether you're working with a peer or you're dealing with a customer. And being able to reach out to that informal mentor that will not threaten you, where you can ask a question and not feel like, oh, is that a dumb question? Will somebody think I'm not ready for the next step or not doing my job well today because I'm asking this question? Those are tremendous opportunities for learning. And I think it's one more way that a company can demonstrate, look, we're providing you a terrific tool to make sure you can be successful in your job. And make sure you have a great support network around you because we think so highly of you and because we want to invest in you as an employee.
Well, great, great. I mean, we learned a lot, and thanks to that conversation, because this organization has paid in 2018, 2019, over $150 million in settling sexual harassment lawsuits. And we provided, I'm coming back to the check-in, where employees now, if company allows, if the leadership allows, employees have access directly to their matrix managers, their mentors and coaches, their HR team partners or HR partners to go and express their concerns or have suggestions in addition to their direct supervisor. And I found out much later that they have adopted a very similar approach in 2020. So we're very happy to hear that. But thanks for that additional, comment on that. Raquel, any comments or follow up on this very important question that Kayleen asked?
Yeah, so I just wanted to ask Jennifer, thanks Adil, what would you recommend HR leaders, during the COVID times, a lot of organizations cut different programs, right? Stuff in HR seems to get cut a lot. And so if an HR leader sees that there's a software technology that could really help facilitate the engagement or check-in or training and development, what would you recommend for these HR leaders to show their CEO or their CFO, this is the value, this is the ROI during these economic conditions?
Sure. Well, you know, I've had great HR partners throughout my career, and the one piece of advice I've always given them is if, you know, you have an initiative that you think is really important for the company, first of all, make sure it lines up against the broader strategic goals of the company, the strategic plan. Because right now, it's not just about the dollars. Right now, people are, in many cases, very much overworked. And I know as a CEO, in terms of introducing one more project or task force to employees, you know, during times when they feel overwhelmed already, it can really, you know, not be perceived very well because they, you know, they really want to be focused on the critical things. So with each initiative you're doing, so if you're bringing forth an HR initiative, I think it's vitally important to demonstrate how it fits with the broader goals of the company. How is it going to help the company achieve its objectives? And in many cases, employees might be receiving bonuses. So if you can tie it into what their performance goals are as well, and their own personal compensation, you're obviously going to get people very much behind it. They're going to be highly motivated to deliver on that. But demonstrating the ROI is very important. So I'm always looking for, if I'm making an investment for the company, what kind of return can I get for the company? And there's hard dollar return and there's soft dollar return. Obviously hard dollar return, if I can demonstrate through an HR initiative, I'm going to increase my level of employee engagement. I'm going to reduce my turnover. I'm going to shorten my time to fill on critical roles when I'm recruiting. You want to think about whatever those core metrics are that you're trying to achieve, whether they're HR metrics or broader company metrics. You know, what does it deliver for the bottom line, or how does it help the company grow? If you can be very hard hitting in terms of demonstrating that value, really important. The one other piece is, even after the initial proposal and you get it accepted, how do you manage that project going forward? You want to make sure that you have developed KPIs and you looked at other benchmarks across the industry. So other companies that have done those kind of initiatives, what kinds of savings are they generating, or what kind of other results are they delivering for people? And then show on a regular basis through whatever your reporting cadence is, how you're delivering on that. If you can show that every month or every quarter, that's really important, because then when the investment comes up again, if the company is considering renewing that software or, you know, continuing that investment for another year, at budget time, you will already have done all of that in terms of presenting the data that demonstrates it's a very powerful initiative that is supporting the company's goals, and it'll be a bit of a slam dunk. Otherwise, you might struggle and you might lose that funding in a subsequent year. So those are some things to think about, I think, as an HR leader that can make a big difference.
Another question comes up, you know, from the data and the relevance of real-time data for the leadership positions you have been in, and how important is it for leaders to have real-time data to make data-driven decisions on day-to-day basis instead of looking in the rearview mirror? And in the light of what we have created, you know, with our leadership dashboards. So I thought I asked a quick question. Sorry, Kayleen, I've added a couple of follow-up questions as they come to mind.
All good, all good.
You know, Adil, whether I've worked for mid-sized companies or even Fortune 500 companies, it's interesting is you have this expectation as a leader that you're going to have data at your fingertips, and that's rarely the case. Either the data is not, you know, up to date or as accessible as you thought, or it may not drill down deep enough to get you the key information you need to make the decisions that are so important. And I was super excited when I initially was shown the Bullseye software because of the dashboards and the data that's accessible, where you can easily customize it. It's sort of calculating behind the scenes on an ongoing basis. So at any given point in time, you can see where you stand. Incredibly important. Today, leaders are expected to be data-driven. They're expected to make fact-based decisions. And when you can support your decisions with that kind of granular data on an ongoing basis, it makes it much easier to run the business. It makes it much easier even to manage your vendors, for example, if you have vendors that are handling certain functions, to know they're performing. So it's really important. It also saves a tremendous amount of time, so you don't have delays in projects and get projects behind schedule because you don't have the critical information that you need to run the business.
Well, I think I want to circle back a little bit to our discussion on engagement. According to recent Gallup polls, organizations with highly engaged employees are achieving things like fewer quality incidents, higher profitability, higher sales, and the list goes on. I'm not going to prove to you guys that I know how to read. So what exactly can organizational leaders do to achieve similar outcomes? And you touched on this a little bit, but how do they continue to fund these initiatives during a time of intense cost cutting?
Well, just to follow up on Adil's question earlier is you should assume when cost cutting is starting to occur or you're struggling with your revenue targets that some of the projects you're working on could be on the chopping block. So again, I'd make sure that you have the data on the projects you're working on so that if they come into question, or even more important, be proactive and take them to your manager or take them to your CFO and say, you know, I know that we're under some tough budget constraints, but I wanted you to know how successful this program has been and why we need to continue to fund it. So being proactive with sharing that data and reporting on how you're performing is incredibly important. And I think the other piece is, we talked a little bit about this, but don't be afraid to course correct as you go. Again, in the old days, we used to train and develop people differently than we do today. So don't just keep going back to your typical playbook in terms of how you get things done. For example, again, you know, one of the things I really appreciated in Bullseye is your chance to do recognition or even have employees recognize other employees. That is not an expensive proposition. It's something that you should be doing all the time to engage your workforce and make sure they understand how much you value them. People like to see their name in lights. They like to see you know, themselves recognized by others in the company, even if it's for something small, before that moment in time goes by. And being able to provide some low-cost rewards and recognition can be really meaningful. I've had employees say to me, you know, getting a thank you at a town hall meeting in front of 100 other people, or receiving a certificate even via email, or being called out on a conference call or in a Zoom meeting for something that I did, that meant more to me than, you know, the bonus that I got last year. You know, so again, I wouldn't be overthinking, you know, how much the monetary things mean. The simple things to make sure you recognize people every day are really important. So I think as we go forward, it's about course correcting how we get things done to get to the same outcome. We can still deliver strong business outcomes and stay on track with our talent management strategies, but deliver them in a different way, embracing technology, making sure when we purchase software too, we're using it to the fullest. I can tell you as a leader in companies, that's something that happens quite often, where people buy software and then they don't utilize it. And that was one of the things I was excited about when I actually purchased Bullseye as a leader, is the fact that our team was utilizing it. It was so easy to use and intuitive that they were using it on a regular basis. It wasn't something that we spent tens of thousands of dollars or hundreds of thousands of dollars on, and then it got shelved and we got no benefit from it. So you want to be purchasing things that you know your employees and leaders are going to embrace, and will again really add value to the company even during tough economic times.
I think we can finish off this discussion with some more on current events and how there are many emotionally charged discussions happening right now regarding equity in society and in the workplace. So how does equity tie into employee engagement? And what can employers do now to be cultural leaders with respect to diversity, equity, and inclusion?
Sure. I think this is a time where a lot of organizations are reflecting on their diversity and inclusion strategies. And I'll give you one example. My current employer is Arizona State University. And, you know, there's been so many incidences of social injustice we've seen of late in the media, which has caused a lot of concern and outright protest in the country. When this occurred, although Arizona State has a very comprehensive D&I strategy, and has always been very connected to the community, and has been able to successfully recruit diverse students and diverse faculty. You know, President Crow and the broader faculty and employees really felt like we needed to do more. And so a new initiative was rolled out with 25 different items on the action plan in terms of new things we were going to do to demonstrate how we were shifting our D&I strategy in these times. And it included things like, first of all, you know, President Crow committed to launching a historical assessment of discrimination and race on the campus. First of all, before a company spends a single dollar in this area or continues to spend money in this area, I think they need to kind of do a level and see where are they right now. You have to figure out what is your current state, and then how do you either build a plan or course correct your plan based on the reality of it. And you shouldn't do that in a silo or in a tunnel in terms of your own view of yourself. I think it's really important to actually talk to key stakeholders. So at a university campus, for example, what do the parents think of you and the students think of how you're performing in this area? How would your vendors rate you? You really want a complete 360 of your stakeholders in terms of how they view you. It may be very different than how you view yourself. It can show you some critical blind spots and will really help you come up with a better plan. So that was kind of the first step in the new 25-point initiative that President Crow rolled out, along with a number of other things. The next one that I think is incredibly important is he committed to rolling out training for all faculty and staff in terms of understanding systematic bias in the hiring and interviewing process. So again, we all come to the table with certain personal biases in terms of how we view other people and how we make decisions about whether they should come to our organization. Are they enough like us? They say in many cases we hire people very much like ourselves, which is why you want to always have a really good cross-functional team and people with different attributes so that you get best-in-class hires as they come into the company and can become more diverse. And so that's one thing that I think was really important, is he's going to make sure that all of the faculty and staff have the right training to make good hiring decisions as we go forward. And then other funding will become available as well to make sure that we have better representation of diverse faculty and students. And so he's putting money behind 50 postdoctoral fellowships that will be tenure track positions where people of color only will be eligible for those, where they can have those fellowships and then can go into tenure track roles to make sure we continue to increase our diversity ranks. And then doing the same among students, there'll be 30 new graduate assistantships just for people of color to make sure they have ample opportunity to get some more experience while they're in graduate school so they can have great job opportunities when they finish. So there were a number of other initiatives, but I think that's just an example of how companies should view what's our current strategy, how do we now need to pivot based on the information we're getting from society or from our own stakeholders to make sure that we can have a very relevant diversity and inclusion strategy in today's environment that can be really successful. So that's, I think one important piece of it. The other thing is inclusiveness, again, is taking a real leading role, is making sure that people feel a part of an organization. And I can give you examples I've seen in different companies that I've either interfaced with or where I've worked. If you're trying to improve your diversity and say you hire the first African-American female into a particular group or a department, if there's no other like role models in your organization, that person is much less likely to stay in the organization. They're not going to feel like they're a part of the organization or there's other people there like them. So it's really important that part of your plan is over time and as quickly as you can, you get other great role models for that individual so you can keep great talent in your company. But that inclusiveness is increasingly important, that they feel a part of things and feel they can be successful. On the university front, another example again is we've really reevaluated our inclusiveness and accessibility as we've rolled out online tools for students. So if students have disabilities, do they really have access to all of the online technology, or are there limitations if they have hearing disabilities, for example? You've got to think about every employee and what kind of experience they're having in the workplace or in the educational environment, to make sure they feel comfortable, they feel accepted, they feel welcome. And there's a lot more focus on those kinds of things now in terms of adding inclusiveness elements to your focus. And then the last piece I'd share from an equity standpoint is really evaluating to see, and you need to really look at your numbers again, use the data to say, are you compensating people fairly regardless of gender, race, function, and so on? Are you providing advancement opportunities in a consistent manner regardless of those attributes as well? And are you hiring in a consistent manner regardless of those attributes? Because again, employees watch those things, and that provides a great deal of dissatisfaction if you're not executing them really, really well as you go through the process. But again, I think as we see some of these societal things happening, it's also important to know, even if you're doing all the right things as a company, sometimes you can see your employee engagement shift because of what's going on out in the community. And so having a strong corporate social responsibility stance and making sure you demonstrate you care about what's happening in the community and you're also working to have an impact can be really, really important. Gallup did a survey this summer, and it was very surprising to see this, but they determined that during the recent issues in Minnesota, where shootings were occurring and so on, that there was actually a decline in employee engagement in companies across the board, not just in Minnesota, but across the country, because that was going on. And so sometimes employees can feel so unsettled based on what's happening in society, it's actually impacting how they feel at work and so on. But and that has come back up now again to more normal levels as things have calmed down a little bit. But companies need to be aware of that. It's the whole big picture in terms of how their employees are experiencing things at work, at home, and in their community.
Just thinking out loud, Jennifer, and out in organizations, obviously we have a very diverse team, but what is your experience, or what kind of data is out there? Because I believe that there's a value in difference of opinion. You know, you have difference of folks, different opinions, and that's where you brainstorm and you get ideas and you develop, and it makes you better, actually. But in your opinion, the outcomes of a diverse team versus not so diverse team, any thoughts?
Yeah, sure. You know, that's really an important consideration because, again, I mentioned that it's very common for people to hire people like themselves because they feel more comfortable. They relate to them, they feel like they can have easy conversations, but that's not the most important test. As you know, Adil, if you have groupthink, and you convene of people around your board table and you have a dozen people there and everyone just says, oh, Adil, yep, you're the smartest man in the room. You have all the best ideas. We have nothing to add. Well, you haven't grown very much as a company. You haven't really stepped outside the box in terms of thinking. And I know you don't operate that way. I know you're extremely good at listening and you really value the ideas others have. And I think that's why you have such a strong company, including how you think about your customer comments. You think very seriously about those, and it helps you create a much better product in a very fluid way. So I think it's incredibly important that companies strive to get that diverse thinking and that level of thinking to really innovate. Again, we have to be moving very quickly in today's world to innovate and really differentiate ourselves. And we do that by bringing people to the table that have ideas that conflict with our own, have different approaches. The other piece is this is a world that is becoming increasingly diverse. So in the US, we know that the minority population continues to increase as a percentage of the overall population. And if we don't think about how we create our own organizations in terms of what our employee population looks like, and it's reflective of our customer base, it's reflective of the societal base, we will not be relatable at all to our customers, and we will not continue to grow and thrive. So we need to make sure that we are relevant to our customers and we have the right kinds of ideas that resonate with them. And through having effective diversity strategies and authentic strategies, not ones that just sort of pay lip service to it. But authentic strategies that we really believe in and we understand add value to the company and to our customers and employees, there's nothing more powerful in terms of delivering on our value proposition.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. And, you know, I come to this space from a very frustrated user perspective, you know, in IE. And most of the advisory board meetings, which I think you have attended a couple. And it's true, it's a true statement, and I've made it many times and would like to make one more time, that when I sit in with our advisors and your experiences and your broad qualifications, I'm the least competent person in that room, but that's how I have learned, and I continue to be. I mean, I come out of every advisory board meeting humbled and down to it and say, I have so much more to learn. And the same is true of our team members here. So thank you for that answer. And I would go to Raquel with all her HR background. Raquel, do you have a follow-up comment or question for Jennifer?
No, I mean, I think it's good. And, I've worked at many large enterprise, organizations in my past life. And, what I've seen is a lot of companies will just, from a diversity and inclusion standpoint, they may just check the box, right? But I think, to your point and what you said, developing and having a real strategy around that, something that's going to be meaningful, I think that will go a long way, especially now and as we look to the future.
Yeah, I think that's very true. And again, it's where the rubber meets the road. People don't want to just say, oh, my company has a diversity strategy, but they want to see it come to life every day in terms of communication that happens, in terms of which people they see at the company that are being promoted, and who they can relate to and who they get a chance to work with, that they believe that's really true. The one last piece I'll leave you with too, and Adil, I know you were talking about data driven and the whole diversity piece, and this is a shout out to women. But there's been much research done in the area of companies and their financial performance, and companies that have women on their boards consistently perform better than companies with 100% male boards. It's one more example of showing if you have diversity at all levels in the company, all the way up to the board, you will be a stronger, better, thriving organization because of it.
That is great. We're up to 3. We've got Jennifer, we've got Sony, and we've got Irene. So I'm so very proud of our board here.
Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm sure our audience will gain lots of valuable insights from this, and thank you for our discussion.
Thank you. It was a pleasure, and everyone stay safe.
Yep.
You too.
Likewise. Thank you. Thank you so much. Stay safe and well.